So last night, my friend contacted me as he needed a ride home from work, and I was the only one available to do so. Initially, his dad was going to give him a ride, but he had an unexpected work emergency come up, so I was his last shot before asking a coworker. We live in Minnesota, so being it was already 9:30 p.m. when he called me, it was dark outside at that point. Now, when I say that we live in Minnesota, I don't mean like way up north in the absolute middle of nowhere, but we live about halfway between St. Cloud and Minneapolis. The drive to pick him up was pretty uneventful, as I took County Road 10 from where I live to pick him up. Anyone who lives in Minnesota knows that this road is basically a highway for rural, smallish towns. I picked him up from the gas station he works at and started the trip to bring him home. Now, my friend, I'll just refer to him as Jay so as not to include any direct names, lives out in one of the townships in Minnesota. This means that for the most part, there are mostly either large pastures, as there are lots of farms in these areas, or woods, not much in between. This also means that Jay's house is, for the most part, in the middle of nowhere, and so the back roads you need to take to get there. This also means that Jay's house is, for the most part, in the middle of nowhere, and so are the back roads you need to take to get there. These back roads mean that there's just enough space on the road for 2 cars and a bit more road on each side for rumble strips to wake anyone who may fall asleep at the wheel before either a bunch of gravel or grass that lead to a ditch and then finally woods or aforementioned pastures. I had my high beams on as there are lots of deer and other wildlife out this time of year, so I wanted to see them before it's too late and they total my car. About halfway into the drive, I saw the outline of something in the middle of the road. I assumed this to be a deer, so I slowed down in order to avoid hitting it. Upon coming closer to the figure, however, I saw that it began to resemble a coyote more. This wasn't surprising to me, though, as there are lots of those in Minnesota. They're like rats. That's how many of them there are. As we came closer to the figure, I got a really uncomfortable feeling as the coyote was refusing to move out of the middle of the road. Another reason that I felt uncomfortable was that while it did look like a coyote, it was just sort of off looking. Now, I know how coyotes look. I was in Boy Scouts from kindergarten to 7th grade, and we'd seen plenty while being out camping. But this one, its front and hind legs were about 1.5 sizes too long. Its torso was also oversized, and its neck was too long. To top this all off, it was also overly bony and looked like it hadn't eaten in weeks. This was very concerning as there are plenty of small game that coyotes can feed on in this area. Already, I wanted to be out of this place just by the way the thing looked and the fact that it didn't take off immediately upon the car getting close to it. I really didn't feel like dealing with a rabid coyote. Now, to get to the thing that unsettled me the most. As I drove slightly off the road to go around the thing, I swear the thing looked straight at both of us. I know I wasn't the only one who felt this, as Jay spoke up. Kinda looks like it's staring at us, and gave a slight uneasy chuckle. Now, when I say that it looked at us, I don't mean looked at the car, but seemed to lock eye contact with us. Even more unsettling is that its eyes weren't yellow like a typical coyote's, but were green and looked extremely bloodshot. After getting around it, I took off as fast as I could and finished bringing Jay home. He, of course, joked around and said things like, Ooh, maybe it was a skinwalker. The thing is, though, this isn't the only time I've had an experience like this, as I've had another situation when I was driving home from Alexandria around 11 p.m., to which I just shrugged off as probably being a rabid coyote. But after last night, I'm 99% positive that thing was not just a rabid coyote. I know. I'm probably just letting my imagination get the best of me. But the fact that I've had something incredibly similar to this happen in the past makes me think that maybe it's not just a coincidence. For a little background on my story, I live in a small town outside Kansas City, Kansas. But the area I live in has a lot of history around it, and there was a lot of Native American activity in the area. My house has a long driveway and is in the middle of a stand of woods. The woods have been there as long as there's records of the area. When we first moved into our home, everything seemed pretty normal. But after about living there a month, that's when abnormal stuff started happening. Pounding on the roof, animal scratches on our vehicles, and we started finding a lot of dead animals on the property. We even contacted the Kansas State Game Wardens, but couldn't find any evidence of poaching or poisoning, or even the animals getting hit by cars. So after about 2 years of this, my older brother moves back in and brings his dog with him. One night around 11 p.m., the dog starts whining to be let out. So I put him on the leash and walk him around our yard. Suddenly, he starts trying to yank me back towards the house. Then this uneasy feeling washes over me, and I notice that something smells like rotting catfish guts mixed with doe estrus. I feel like someone was watching me, so I turn around, and down by our garage, just inside the light, I see this figure. It was about 5 foot tall, hunched over. It was very pale, almost translucent. It had small, deep-set, beady eyes and a deer-like face. A sense of pure terror washed over me. I've never been more scared of anything in my life, and to this day, I've never felt that level of fear. I ran back into the house and wake up my dad and brother. They grab some shotguns and run outside to check it out. All they find are some pretty deep scratch marks on the garage. We contacted game wardens the next day. I described what I saw and smelled, and they said it was probably a very sick deer that had contracted mange or something of the sort. Weird stuff kept happening for another year or two. Then we had this really bad drought, and all the stuff stopped occurring. So I don't know what in the Sam Hill it was I saw out there that night. I'm not being followed by anything other than my memories of that moment. That moment that felt like an eternity to me was certainly only a few seconds, but they were the most haunting seconds of my life. Old dream with titanic mountains jutting out aggressively, all of which are blanketed in dense forests. I love my hometown. Everything's within walking distance. Friends, the bar, the lake. It's all great nearby. So we often hit the town together, no need to drive anywhere or anything. Last night, we decided to have a little bonfire on this little ridge off the side of the lake, which really doesn't provide too much surface area for a bonfire. For this reason, the 10 of us were huddled around a dimly lit campfire instead. guitars being played, fine alcohols being drank, and good times being had by all. As the night draws on, I've charged myself with keeping the bulk of the fire going. Nobody else is really too apt at any sort of camping or otherwise outdoorsy activities in my group. Up until this point, all was very normal, other than my close friend acting a little off. After our first few, he had run out and left by himself to get more. The ridge was out of sight of the road due to the dense forest path that we had used to get to and from it, so he goes and cuts through it alone. When he gets back, he's acting like he's had 100 beers. Looks like he wasn't used to his legs. Strangely enough, he had a full case of beer with him, so I assumed he hadn't drank any more. He also wasn't gone for very long at all. Honestly, we drink together often, me and him. I know what he's like drunk, and this was particularly unusual. So he's trying to talk to people, but he just can't say real words. It was as if he was trying to perform all of the accents of normal English speech, but didn't really actually understand any words or syntax. Kind of like those videos that are meant to elucidate on what English might sound like to non-English speakers. As I mentioned before, the fire wasn't providing much in terms of light, so when we'd head off to grab some firewood, I'd usually jerry-rig my cell phone flashlight into my belt, keep the area in front of me well lit, as not to fall for fear of losing teeth. We do this a few times, and some of the others begin to lose a little motivation to collect wood. So I take matters into my own hands for the last run of the evening. This brush was completely uncultivated, super thick, very dark. The only discernible paths were about shoulder width and obstructed by the old fallen tree here and there. So I'm yanking at trees, trying to feel for anything dry. Even my phone light was falling behind waist-level foliage. I really didn't have too much lighting. Once I got a handful or so, I figured it'd be good enough for the last burn, so I get the idea to head back. But just as I get this thought, my phone falls straight to the ground. So, of course, it had to land face down, blocking the flash, preventing me from finding it right away. Regardless, I didn't look for it immediately. For some reason, I decided to let the darkness sink in. Never had I been in such a dark environment that I was unable to see my hand right in front of my face. Even the brightest moonbeams couldn't breach the canopy above. However, as I focused on my surroundings, I quickly realized I was referencing my frame using a subtle glow. It was yellowish, but twisted into a green color the more I concentrated. I was immediately very startled by its lack of movement, yet dully curious. I hesitantly paced inward, carelessly leaving my phone on the ground. As I approached, the glows split distinctly into two yellow-green bulbs that were locked to each other, their eyes. My vision is really bad, especially with lighting, so from a distance, my eyes will merge sources of light together. For instance, I can't see stars. This caused my curiosity to go nuts. What kind of fat raccoon is trying to stalk me through these bushes? Something was hitting me, though. I was terrified. I bore a fear so intense that my stomach began to churn. My curiosity has always outweighed my fears, and this situation was no different. Something was hitting me, though. I was terrified. I bore a fear so intense that my stomach began to churn. My curiosity has always outweighed my fears, and this situation was no different. It watched me as I watched it. I began to know what it was. It began to know me. There was a very strange bond in that moment that chilled me to the core. I've never had a connection to this living thing, but its eyes were pumping fear into my body. The worst mistake I'd ever make is to follow. Nervously, I yelled loud enough to attempt to startle whatever it may have been engaging in this chilling stare down against me at only about 7 or 8 foot distance. Its absolutely motionless reaction to my yelp began to chip away at my sanity. Was I staring at two elaborately placed lights in the middle of the woods? No, it couldn't be. They had to be eyes, and this battle cry didn't even make the thing flinch. Because of that, part of me rationalized that it could not possibly be any animal. It's probably some kind of prank, or a marker for some kind of ecology job. So I pressed towards it again, walking as if I knew for sure that this could all be logically explained. As I closed the gap, my vision began to hone in on these lights, plainly defined ovals, resplendent with the brightest darkness I've ever felt. And they were just out of my range of clear vision. The lights, which were waist level before, rose up. They rose as eyes would on a bear standing onto its hind legs, instantly reducing me to a quivering mess. Odd thing is, bears don't have antlers. I have never heard of a moose with piercing eyes that can stand on its hind legs either. As soon as it began to straighten up, I was already getting out of there. I just ran. Luckily, I managed to kick my phone out of the dirt and hurriedly picked it up. The flashlight was still going, making it really easy to spot once I perturbed it. Rolling through the woods, illuminating phone now in hand, I made it back to my campfire completely out of breath. Now, normally I'd spray this story all over my friends, but I knew they'd just think I went freaking nuts or hit my head collecting wood. Also, considering I didn't have a bundle of sticks anymore, my shortness of breath was probably a little unjustified. I sat down and noticed that my friend from before was still being very strange, but it seemed like with every passing minute, he was adapting more to the conversation and was steadily attempting to contribute more and more. We are all good friends, which is why I find this unusual, considering the fact that he legitimately could not speak English 1 minute. Then, within 15, he's practically back to normal. Still, something was off. He was the last to leave the campfire. Even after the other guys had petered out, he just stayed and stared at the ashes. After most of us had gotten home, he calls me. An entire minute of silence. The whole time I'm shouting at him to tell me where he is, and that if he's too drunk to get home, I'll go and find him. Disturbingly, he just hangs up. After a cigarette and another half a beer, he calls me again. This time he's trying to talk, but like before, he just can't pronounce any words. He never did touch that case of beer he brought, by the way. Just sat next to it during the whole fire. So I tell him to stop being an idiot and to tell me where he is. He hangs up again, leaving me to figure he's just drunk, emotional, and that maybe I was a bit too harsh on him. Honestly, though, I was just so shaken up, I needed to confide in somebody about what I had just seen. But he was incapacitated, and it frustrated me. After that, I went to bed because I figured he was just strangely drunk. It was insanely weird to me, but I had a few drinks too, so I wasn't really having any of this crap, and figured I'd try to get some sleep. When I woke up this morning, I had a text message from his roommate asking me why he saw him crawl out from underneath his car and drive away this morning. I haven't seen him since, and his roommate said he thought he never made it home because he didn't come in. So, what is wrong with my friend? I'm hoping he comes back because if he doesn't, I believe that my buddy has just gotten his skin and car hijacked by a skinwalker. Thanks for joining me, Madam Horror, for your bedtime scary stories. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons. It helps a lot. If you have a story you would like read on this channel, send it to me at madamhorror1@gmail.com. Join me next week for more stories of the unknown.